Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. We're stoked to be able to have Andrew Johnson, the ACS CEO, who's actually on business in Malaysia from his hotel room. So thanks for that, Andrew. Andrew's going to give us an overview of the IT landscape in Australia and also what ACS is doing to assist in this area. I've got Dr. Nick Tate beside me who'll bring a bit of a Queensland flavour into it. So I'm really excited to have you both here today and appreciate your time. On that note, Andrew, over to you.
Thanks, Ross, and thanks, Nick, and welcome everybody. As Ross said, currently dialing in from Malaysia, Sarawak, which is the biggest state in Malaysia, and have just attended their digital transformation inaugural conference. Why that is important, firstly, to demonstrate that technology does close borders, and part of ACS walking the walk, being able to undertake webinars from anywhere in the world is important. But today I really want to focus on where the IT landscape is in Australia and how we might be able to re-engineer ourselves to be more outwardly focusing, looking at export markets. So I'll kick off, and feel free to jump in with questions during the presentation.
Yeah, we've got the Q&A button there for that too.
Excellent. So the slide on the screen at the moment has been taken from our Digital Pulse report with Deloitte Access Economics. This one was from 2 years ago, forecasting that the digital economy in Australia would grow to 139 billion by 2020. Now that's a 75% increase, and that's rather rapid growth, as one might expect. But I think the really important piece on this slide is the dark green down below, where the traditional IT services area would grow from 13 billion to 15 billion. But the vast majority of growth is in the verticals and the continued digitization and automation that is achievable in all of our strong areas. If I was to look at the last 5 years, this would be my summary of what we've observed in the marketplace. So we have a definite gap in human capital. And there's, I guess, a lot of press at the moment around 457 visas and the like. But our analysis shows that we've got around 4,000 graduates coming out of technology degrees, and the work with Deloitte Access Economics forecasting 100,000 new jobs needed by 2020. That's 2 years. We have a new report coming out in May with increasing data, more refreshed data, and we're still looking at a shortfall of around 70,000. So that supply and demand equation, there is a significant gap, and we need to build digital skills, technology skills right across the Australian economy. So assuring that pipeline, absolutely critical. And I'll talk about some of the things that ACS has planned in the future to help address that gap. We've also seen a whole bunch of roles that have been either outsourced or offshored at an entry level. And that's had a number of impacts. Firstly, organisational charts have thinned out. And so that second dot point there where I've got aligning ICT to business strategy, and the third dot point, technical roles increasingly having a customer interface. So as the org charts have thinned out, our traditional technical roles have had to interact with the customer to a greater extent than has historically been the case. And that is from design through to the customer services aspect. Aligning ICT to business strategy, these days there is no difference. People are moving to digital business models, and your business strategy includes a heavy investment in technology so that you can be a digital type of business. Global supply chains, I guess you can look at that two ways. Firstly, our multinationals have distributed work teams right across the globe. So there's work teams in Australia, work teams across Asia, work teams in America. How do you integrate and provide that seamless experience for your customers? But also, when you're a little bit smaller, how do you undertake partnership arrangements and ensure that seamless customer experience? So there's been a lot of business models, partnerships going on. Cloud mobility and BYOD, I think, has been driven a lot by government. So in Australia, government spending across all levels represents between 35 to 40% of GDP. A significant impact on spending in our economy. And as government's re-engineered itself and reorganised itself to be more citizen-focused, providing services available at all times, 24/7, there's been a real focus on those types of technologies. That's come with it a whole bunch of transformation, big projects. You see a lot of press, again, particularly in government, around new systems being implemented. We've had a need for IT governance and risk management skills being built in. And then if I go to the next top point, enterprise and solutions architecture, I think from my perspective, again, for the big ones, everyone has the enterprise architects, but possibly in the SME market, people have moved to cloud, undertaken multiple cloud providers, and then you have some integration and I guess user experience challenges about bringing all those things together. Big data and system security are really only just starting, and I'll talk about that in a few more slides. For those who haven't seen it, this is a summary slide from our cybersecurity report released back in November. Really a desktop scan across the world of all the sorts of things that have been happening in cybersecurity. From my perspective, if Australia is to have a really strong economy in the future, as we move to the digital and knowledge economies, you have to have a really strong banking and finance sector. And with that goes a really strong cybersecurity strategy and execution capability. So the one that sort of makes me smile on this particular slide, if I look down the bottom right-hand corner, I would get, and I think we do pretty well with our security system, but I would get at least 6 people reminding me a day of my unpaid bill, but because I'm a valued client, that if I just click here and pay within 48 hours, I'll have no interruptions to my service delivery. So the phishing that's going on at the moment is just incredible. And unfortunately, a lot of the broader population don't have the cyber awareness and are finding themselves in a little bit of trouble. From a user perspective, I'm really excited by the Internet of Things and what that might mean. In 2005, I think we had 6 billion devices connected to the Internet of Things. Last year, it was around 15 billion. And while estimates vary, so Huawei would say 130 billion by 2020, Intel will say up to 200 billion by 2020. 99% of the things in the world are not yet connected to the internet. So absolute explosive growth potential in that particular area. With that, though, will come a whole bunch of endpoint security challenges, and we're only just starting to scratch the surface there. I think the term digital disruption is used basically to promote a new technology. And from my perspective, this definition provided by Sydney University really talks about the background to what is disruption. And that's new ways of doing business that create value and change our way of thinking. So it's very difficult to identify what that next disruptive technology might mean, but more so it's about a system of technologies and bringing products to market that challenge the status quo. So it's very easy to scale with technology using the internet today. Ross asked that I throw in some polls just to make sure the technology is working. So here's one of my favorite slides. I've used it a few times, so apologies if people have seen it before. Currently on the screen is the top 5 in the NASDAQ back in 2000. And just as a way of showing how technology transforms in a short period of time, I've blanked out what the top 5 looked like in 2015. So I'd just like to ask you now to use your chat and send through a response. How many of those 5 companies were still in the top 5 15 years later? 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5? So Ross, you'll have to give me a heads up as to how the numbers are looking.
Yeah, we've got a few responses coming through at the moment. Yeah. Okay. 2, 1, 2, 5. Yeah. 3. Most there's between 2 and 3. People are saying
2 and 3. Okay. There it is. It's just the one, Microsoft.
Wow.
So Google, Facebook, Amazon, all new entrants, and you can see the ones that have slipped down the slide. If you look at today's NASDAQ, a little bit of difference with the separation of Google, but again, that's how rapidly the landscape can change. You would think, or at least I would think, in a 15-year period, when you look at the market capitalization of those top 5 companies, their ability to undertake acquisitions, to invest in research and development, how quickly can that change in just a 15-year period? So the big companies are absolutely being disrupted by newer companies. This slide, again, taken from Digital Pulse. Right now, in today's Australian environment, our current wave of disruption is very much about mobile. So services anywhere, the customer experience on your mobile, analytics, cloud, social. And then the future waves of disruption. So we're hearing a lot at the moment about artificial intelligence. I'm not sure of your experiences, but I think there's a lot of investment being made. And again, this will be an area that will only explode in the next 5 to 10 years. Internet of Things, we've already covered. That somewhat also includes connected homes, 3D printing, drones. Some stakeholders I've met while in Malaysia have been fascinated by drones, and I can see how they're using it to deploy it across a range of different things. A lot of possibilities moving into the foreseeable future. I think it's really important just to take stock of where the Australian economy is. This slide's been taken from an Austrade report, and it shows that Australia is the 12th largest economy in the world. Now, if you look at our population, we're not even in the top 50 populations in terms of size across the globe. So for a long time, we've really lived, we've punched above our weight and had a very high standard of living. In fact, I think most economists are expecting that come April 1, they haven't seen the results so far, but we're expecting to have beaten the Netherlands record for the most consecutive quarters of economic growth, uninterrupted economic growth, and that would be 104 consecutive economic growth quarters. You would have heard many times about Australia entering its 26th year of uninterrupted economic growth and the average rate of return over that period of time. So we've had an economic engine second to none over that period. This particular slide shows those developing economies on the left-hand side, developed economies on the left-hand side, and then developing economies on the right. And Australia is the only developed economy that hasn't had a recession over that period of time. In the developing world, China, Vietnam, and India obviously have been growing very fast as well. But again, on the left-hand side, Canada, US, UK, all across Europe, no one has been able to avoid a recession type period. Even Australia going through the GFC, we've been able to reinvest using government borrowings to ensure continued growth. Why is that important? So Australia is a very small economy. This current slide shows you our major trading partners. China, incredibly big, and historically we've heard the phrase that if America experienced a cold, Australia would get a really big flu. But China now is a very incredibly large trading partner for Australia. Just wanted to throw in trade balance. So over the last couple of years, it's only in the last 2 quarters that Australia has had a positive trade balance. And what's driven that? I might just throw that open to a poll, and Ross, see if we can get some answers as to why all of a sudden in the last 2 quarters, Australia has received a very positive trade balance.
Yeah, and just send your responses via the Q&A or the chat forum there, and we'll come back to that in a sec. We've had one, resources. Coal, another one, so similar. Coal jump, short term. China and resources. Seems to be around the resource sector, I'd say, the general comments. Exports.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And that is accurate, but I guess over the last 2 or 3 years, the volume of trade in coal hasn't been the important driver. When we started to have negative trade balance, the price of iron ore went down by 2/3. And in the last couple of quarters, both coal and iron ore have gone up in price quite considerably. So we are very heavily reliant on the resources sector.
Yeah.
A little bit of a graph in terms of our top 10 exports. You'll see education is number 4 there, and then tourism at number 5. Obviously, that's heavily dependent on currency fluctuations, but the rest are commodities, resources, and agriculture. So very much all of our revenue is geared from 2 particular areas.
Yeah.
I've taken this graph again from the Austrade report, and you can see Australia. If you're leading the country, it's very easy to say, look at our government net debt there, very small in comparison to other developed economies and developing economies. Australia is really travelling well. Now that is true in isolation, but this next slide shows Australian government debt to GDP over the time since just before the GFC through to today. Now, if your child was bringing that as a report card home, you'd have every right to be concerned, wouldn't you? In fact, the graph's probably a little bit misleading in that it's blue, and you could be flipping the other side and making it red, and having the graph go down the other way. A little bit of analysis that ACS has undertaken in developing a new strategy, which will come into play from 1 July. What have been the GDP growth drivers in Australia? Here you can see we've had, Australia has all been about capital investment. Again, resources and agriculture have been the drivers for us. And then to compare that to where the growth has come from the USA, which has been around the innovation space. This particular spider chart has come from the Global Competitiveness Report. The World Economic Forum puts it out every year. This one was from 2014 and 15. And you can see when you compare Australia to the rest of the world, where our shortcomings are. Again, labour market efficiency, hot topic in Australia, very sensitive, and the innovation area as well. So it makes a lot of sense why government has invested heavily in promoting the innovation message. Yeah. On the right-hand side, which I can't actually see with the numbers given our screenshots, but you can see a ranking of Australia 22 across Switzerland being number 1, Singapore, and the United States. Mm. To the innovation space, across the world, a couple of experiences that are really important and why we've seen a lot of press around startups and entrepreneurism in Australia. All the data shows that as organisations get to a certain size, they start to outsource offshore their production to lower their costs. They might maintain design in a particular country or where they originated, but overall they look to achieve efficiencies, improve quality and production. Now, what does that mean for an economy? Is that as you get to a certain size and reach large firm status, you don't add new jobs to your economy. So there's a real need to invest in the small firm. So organisations that don't currently exist, how do they get their idea up, do the proof of concept, take that idea to market? And then for those who have been around 3 to 5 years, how can we create an environment where they are focused on growth and create more jobs for your economy? So the SME market has been absolutely critical to being the engine room for employment.
We've had a comment saying Apple follows this, designed in USA, made in China.
I won't comment on that one. This next graph, I've just taken a couple of screenshots, and if you haven't seen it, Raina Strack, a TEDx talk on the workforce skills crisis by 2030. So Raina works for Boston Consulting Group, fantastic presenter, and if you haven't seen it, I'd highly recommend it. Very entertaining. But just some simple modelling ideas that get people thinking about what does the future like and how can you take a whole of economy approach to bringing your citizens with you. So Raina asked the question, what does our workforce look like today and what will it look like in future, which is this first slide. Using the 15-year age starting point, that's when you can be employed in Germany, and then extrapolating that for the next 15 years over to 2030, to look at the current population and how that age trend will change over that period of time. He then asked the question of, if we were to maintain our standards of living or our current GDP growth over that same period of time, what would that look like in terms of the job market in today's environment? So I think it was around 2% for Germany. Taking it out to 2030, you can see an 8 million gap of jobs, labour force to demand at that period of 2030. So that's obviously massive and should be a big concern for what is considered the engineering powerhouse across the world in terms of quality. Now, how else would you address a gap? You can encourage people to have more children, but Raina's model showed that if you're looking at a 15-year age bracket, you can't actually increase births to a working population over that period of time. And so importation is the other strategy. He then extrapolated the same theory across a whole bunch of different economies. And as you can see, when you look at the right-hand side graph, there are a whole bunch of developed economies that will also be struggling to find the skills and people they need to maintain that level of growth that their economies have been experiencing. So importation isn't necessarily going to be a solution for everyone. A couple of things that ACS has been doing for the last 3 to 4 years, which have been really important for us, and that's been our investment in workforce development. Australia has a really unique economy compared to many others. I mentioned that we're not in the world's top 50 populations. We have 2.1 million businesses across the country. 60% of those have no staff, so business owner led. And only 3% of those businesses have 20 or more staff. So the SME area has absolutely been the engine room for jobs in our country. But what that also means is there's been a big discrepancy about what happens for large employers in terms of occupational standards, where people have their skills, how they deploy those skills in their jobs, compared to the SME marketplace.
Sorry, had a previous for the previous slide. Were you referring to the labour supply in general or ICT sector?
No, that was in general, across all industries.
Thank you.
So we've spent a lot of time working with our members to identify the skills needed in their occupations. And this particular dashboard came from our skills survey back in 2013, where 100 CIOs responded to the survey, and they were asked for the top 4 skills that they used in their current job. And that was to give us an indication of marketplace demand. From that data, we had a variance of 21 different skills across those 100 CIOs. IT governance was the skill most commonly identified, so that we've got that listed there as a primary skill, and then the other top skills that were also identified. But I think the big thing from my perspective is the one on the right, 21 different skills. Similarly, for an IT security specialist, not as big a sample size at 61, but 25 different skills. And I think right now this is a really important discussion point for our country, in that cybersecurity is multidisciplinary by nature. What it looks like for one IT shop differs from another, and then how do we have expectations of the broader team, with everyone having a responsibility in the cybersecurity space. But 25 different skills identified by our survey respondents. This graph might be a little bit hard to see on your screens, and it's not really important in terms of the words, but from that survey, what we did was plot the skills that were most commonly identified, and now with those pastel colours, you can see where those areas of commonality have been. And from this 25 common jobs, you can see both vertical and horizontal skills transfer, where things are common, what the marketplace is dictating is required in Australia. So very powerful on how do you unpackage, repackage, and create job descriptions that allow your organisation to progress into the future. Just an example of an article that I saw in the Fin Review back in last year. This one was PwC and Deloitte talking about how their trained lawyers and commerce graduates have been upskilled to write code, and why that was important. But not because they're going to be sitting in the office writing code all the time, but to understand the process of bringing disparate systems together, maybe undertaking some basic coding to create APIs and the like. But that, for us, has been a really early indicator as to what Australia skills needs will be in the future. We have a more pronounced T-shaped requirement. And when I say T-shaped, just imagine the T. We do need to have a very deep discipline-specific skill, but to be successful in the Australian economy, you must be able to work across all aspects of the business. So Australians are very well known for communication skills, being able to partner with the business, being able to work with other organisations in partnership models. We have 600,000 IT workers in our country, and if I compare that to Japan has over 900,000 software engineers. So generally speaking, those larger economies, you can find job roles are narrower, and yes, they have very deep technical expertise, where we have more generalists as a result of the nature of our economy. So for our corporate solutions, being able to aggregate skills and provide dashboard reporting has been our investment through our MySophia solution. We do have a general self-assessment for members, but basically the power of Sophia and skills is in the aggregation reporting and being able to identify a skills inventory today that you can then start to plan out where you want to be in the future and how to make that transition. These are just some of the reports. For those who aren't familiar, Sophia was started in the UK, sorry, still administered through the UK, a global skills framework, two-dimensional, over 90 technical skills across 7 different levels, and at the back end 4 general skill areas. Going back to the pastel coloured graph that I showed, why is that important? For larger organisations, you're able to chart your own job descriptions, put the skills in there, and then very quickly, by clicking on the types of job roles on the right, see where there is skills overlaps, where there's shortages, and it empowers individuals to be able to build the skills that they wish to pursue career-wise. Our career progression these days is not linear. It goes in 101 different directions because of the generalist nature required by the Australian economy. And again, this particular one you can see where a self-assessment might have identified some shortfalls in skills and empowers the individual to undertake their own PD and education pathways to achieve their career ambitions. Again, just some more dashboard reports. I wanted to spend a few moments just talking about, that's the current Australian landscape. I think some of the attractive features of Australians by nature is that they're very much, we're very much roll up your sleeves, can do attitude, make things happen. And I think as we move to a more digital and knowledge-based economy, one of the really important characteristics is that we need to take a broader global view. And you sometimes hear that in the media that maybe we've been a bit insular looking, maybe not compared to some other larger countries, but certainly we have capability. We're well placed across Asia. We have some very trusted relationships over a long period of time, and our trade in the agriculture and resources sector has been incredibly high. So there's a great deal of trust with Australia and our major trading partners. What we really need to do now is take our IT services delivery and to move into that space in a far faster manner than we're currently undertaking. We do have some challenges, and by that I would mean that the level of mathematics in Australia has been reduced quite considerably compared to our OECD countries over the last 10 years. So our quality of mathematics standard going backwards would impact, I would think, naturally around the digitised automation aspects. And also, I think that also has the potential to displace pockets of those traditional job areas that are experiencing automation from being more easily transferred into other parts of growing sectors. So part of our education piece around what the Australian economy looks like has been Digital Pulse. We've worked with Deloitte Access Economics for the last 2 years, and it's been very well received by a broad stakeholder group, government included. We certainly use it for advocacy. The last 2 editions have highlighted the shortfall of students and the sorts of ICT education being undertaken at the high school level. So the ACARA digital curriculum has been out for a couple of years. Uptake has been a little bit slow, and obviously under a federated model happens state by state and differences in how that's applied. So another investment in Digital Pulse to come out in May. Some really exciting things in there from the drafts that I've seen. I won't preempt the report. The importance of the report is it's an independent analysis by Deloitte Access Economics. So we don't influence the content. We do influence the research areas, and they then publish their findings. Second dot point, new strategy from 1 July. Again, I won't preempt. President will make some announcements in the coming weeks around what that new strategy looks like. But I'm feeling really confident that it helps corral and focus energies. From an economic perspective, I think it's very clear across our stakeholders in our Congress that we all believe that economic growth is a good thing, and that if we can raise the size of the economy, raise the size of the ICT workforce, the number of ICT companies working, then that lifts the boats of everyone. And we certainly have some focus areas on how we get more people participating in the digital space. ICT educators would be one of them. You know, I I smile when I think of how hard it must be if you're working in primary schools and kids come in with a whole range of different technologies that in some cases are going to be better than the schools. So I think they've got a hard job ahead of them. And ACS has been very cognizant of how we can provide some support. You'll see that we've made a pre-budget submission to the federal government in December about what that might look like. And so we're hopeful of being able to work with government to roll out some initiatives based on successful models that our counterparts in the UK have undertaken. Cybersecurity, we've had a cybersecurity task force that's been looking at certification, also accreditation, our common body of knowledge or core body of knowledge, and the accreditation piece. So a task force led by our one fellow ACS fellow, Professor Jill Slay in Canberra, who works with University of New South Wales and also ADVA. So some exciting announcements will come out in the cybersecurity space in the near future. Pardon me. Big data, also led by Dr. Ian Opperman, the New South Wales Chief Data Scientist. He's been undertaking open framework sharings consultations around the country. And so a lot of good advocacy pieces are coming out of that for government. Credentialing, I guess many people have heard of MOOCs. What does that look like? Our feeling from our scans of the international marketplace is that people do need their degrees as the baseline, but that theory of ongoing continuous learning throughout your career is becoming more and more important. And those pathways won't occur as you go on another degree, another postgrad pieces of study, but it is about short, sharp upskilling so that you can take your career into 101 different directions. So that piece we think is very important. And final one, assuring the pipeline of talent via awareness campaigns. Being totally pragmatic, we could talk about skill shortages. Every other industry would say exactly the same. So it is a case of how do you sell your message to the workers of tomorrow? So how do you invest in getting young people excited about digitization, about automation, about robotics, about artificial intelligence? And so we're making a very concentrated effort to get that market message right. And you'll start to see some new ACS campaigns on billboards, on TV and the like, hopefully getting past kids, but to mums and dads. So it's very easy to ignore what you don't understand. And we recognise that we have to get parents on board to encourage the next generation of the IT professional. So there's some of the things that we've got coming up. Ross, I thought I'd throw over to you now and see if we do Q&A.
Yeah, go for it. Nick?
Just a thought, Andrew, if I start the process running, there's just a couple of questions coming in, but we'll get to those in just a moment. Thinking about the Queensland perspective, as the audience today is predominantly in Queensland, up and down the state, I guess you could say, if we thought about that compared with the national perspective and the sort of figures you've been looking at, you might say there's probably a lower number of head offices of corporations in Queensland. A much bigger proportion in the economy is SMEs, partly because of the first of those items, and the government tends to have a much larger footprint in the economy. I'm talking again about the ICT economy, a much larger footprint in the ICT economy in Queensland. Do you think that in any way changes the message we're talking about? Does that in any way change what you're describing?
So my personal view is no, but I think that's a multi-layered question. So if I could just spend a few moments. Firstly, procurement reform. Everyone recognises that government is a big purchaser of IT services, and that historically processes have been cumbersome, and as a result, and the bureaucracy around due governance has resulted in larger players getting more than their fair share of government contracts. So there's been a recognition across all levels of government, Queensland as well, about how you get more SMEs involved in your supply side, allowing them to show innovation, allowing them to get their test case customers that they can then demonstrate success to and take their products and services to a broader market. So I still would stick with the message of, I think there's a lot of talent in Queensland, and it would be great for that talent to be focused on export markets. Recognising where you are in your maturity cycle would dictate when that investment's wise to make and when it's still in the building phase. In terms of the SME startup phase, the message still remains the same. So the entrepreneurism aspect of how we create new value, new business models, and can digitize products and services, unlike we've done in the past, is important for all of us, and no more important than the SME market. So we won't be able to, if I look at Alibaba and bringing Chinese SMEs to a global marketplace, our competitors now can sprout up from anywhere in the world at any time. And so we really need to be nimble. We need to be able to minimize our cost in what is otherwise a high labor cost market, and then to seek a global audience for our products and services. So I think that's still a key message for our Queensland SMEs. But I recognise what you're saying, and absolutely government is a major influencer, and we do need to continue to work with government, as you do, Nick, through KICTA and through ACS in the advocacy piece, to make sure that government's aware of what is required to be very innovative.
And the Queensland Government has a particular procurement model for SMEs. It has particular provision for them and for innovative activities for our SMEs as well. So it's been something we've been pushing for a while. So there have been a couple of questions coming through, Andrew. One of them, a comment or a question, really talking about the fact that tech integrators in schools could play a key role in integrating technology to align with a syllabus and become a point of contact between educators and IT. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely, and that's why we have made a submission around ICT educators. We see that as a really the quickest way to expedite the development, the curiosity, the ability to design technology systems to encourage kids from an early age. Certainly a lot of work done by our technical boards, and a strong feeling that if kids are having a negative experience with technology early in the piece, then it's going to be really hard to bring them back to technology careers after they leave school or university.
And another one, I think another interesting one here from a thought of ITT skills. Someone asking, what about mature people transitioning into new areas like cybersecurity?
So I think that's a very good example. I think mature workers or workers in other industries like advanced manufacturing that have experienced downturns, I think one of the really important things, as you would have seen in that the skill transferability charts, is that we're aware that we need to find other ways to pathway more people into technology jobs. And I think cybersecurity is a really good one, in that you don't necessarily need to have technology skills in some roles before the questions come in nice and hot. There are ways to enter the cybersecurity industry without that technical background. And I guess many of our thought leaders would say, investments in education awareness and practice for your front end staff being one of your key areas of weakness. There are ways to bring more people into cybersecurity. So I mentioned that we'd have some announcements in the future around cybersecurity. We have undertaken MOUs with two very well-known brands in the cybersecurity space, being Osaka and ISC Squared. We understand we need to help the Australian economy by defining those occupations that are cybersecurity related, and then the skills needs of each of those. And by doing that, we'll be able to expedite people moving into those roles from other areas.
Thanks, Dan. There's another one on a slightly similar topic, but more generally relating to ICT. Andrew, given the estimated ICT skill shortages, both now and the future, there seems to be a large gap that could be filled by people over 45, some of whom remain unemployed for significant lengths of time. And I think the question is asking how we might address that. How we should address it, I guess.
Yeah, look, I think, again, that's a tricky one, and responsibility exists right across the landscape. So I think if I was to look at the big end of industry, cherry picking talent is a good way to drive ahead. But that reinvestment in education and how they might have been able to influence the broader population in terms of skills base hasn't been to the level that I would have expected. It's very easy to look back in hindsight and say the last 15 years we could have invested better, but I think that's clearly true, and we need to take our learnings away from that and start to address these issues now. I also think that government, in my observations, have very strong project management, business analysis in their full-time staff, but that we haven't been investing in technical skills. And I think some clear examples over the last 12 months, starting with the census example, that you can't outsource risk. Someone within your organisation is signing off on the strategy, off on the governance, to saying that these technologies will work together and produce the result that we're after. So I say all that by meaning that you do need to take a longer term view of workforce development and workforce planning, and that the reinvestment and training is a collective responsibility. So we do have, you would have seen our last digital pulse did talk about the existing workforce being the #1 way to address our skill shortages. And there's no right or wrong way on how to do that, but it does take a political will, and it does take business commitment to provide those opportunities and those retraining programs, and to bring people in, realising that they need to be developed with the business. And I think that's one of the areas that, again, I'd say business in the current environment seems to take the short-term option, and that needs to be counterbalanced by a longer-term view. So I certainly agree with the sentiment. Not easy to do. It needs to be looked at on a case-by-case basis with employers, and also in collaboration with government.
Yeah, fantastic. Nick, is there anything you would say?
Just a quick thought. Hang on. There's a question here, and then I'll come up with another area I just wanted to ask you to comment on, Andrew. So the question is, could you mention the name of the professors who are working on big data and cyber security again? I'm interested in these areas. I think you were talking about Professor Jill Slay and Dr. Ian Opperman, weren't you? So Professor Jill Slay,
that's correct, yes.
Security, and Dr. Ian Opperman, who's the New South Wales Chief Data Scientist on big data. It would be my understanding. Okay.
That's right. Yes, thanks.
Just ask you, reflecting as we go sort of further down the existing stack. We did a bit of a survey in Queensland and looked at the number of students and schools in grade 12, year 12, whichever you want to talk about it, who were doing an IT-related subject. We were trying to look at how they transferred into university. There were about 6,000, as far as we could tell. So some of the stuff we're doing, and I just encourage you to suggest it, but I think some of the stuff we're doing, perhaps more than we've done in the past, is to encourage our students to join, not just at university level, though that's extremely important, but also even in those final years of school, as we work with ICT educators. That's something, that's part of our strategy, is it not? And one that would apply to Queensland.
Absolutely, it's incredibly critical, and there's some good numbers to be hearing.
Okay, and the comment I think from the respondent who previously talked about the over 45, I think, is that it's not so much retraining existing staff, but how we tackle the age bias. And I guess you would have a comment, I know, Andrew, with your experience around the country on that. But I guess age bias is something that we're seeing in Australian industry, not just in ICT, but across the industry as a whole. Is that fair?
Yeah, look, that's been a consistent theme in all of our research reports that would even go back now 10 years. So if you were to pick up some of our early reports, age bias is absolutely very real, and it's been well known. Have we been able to advocate and create some new ways of addressing that? I would say no. We have, across the country, whether it's government or otherwise, we have yet to be successful in what that looks like.
But it is, I suspect, as we tackle, without putting words in your mouth, Andrew, at all, but as we tackle a time of a great deal of skill shortage, would be the right time to once again be talking about changing attitude with age bias, because as the skills are short, and if people do have the skills but are older, then is the time to be talking about with industry and government about tackling age bias. Is that fair, do you think?
Absolutely critical, yes.
Excellent. Look, don't seem to see any more questions. Nick, have you got anything you wanted to add to?
No, I'd just like to thank Andrew very much. It's a great tribute to where technology is taking us, that we're able to bring Andrew in from the very long distance away in Sarawak, and clearly having got to Sarawak, we'll now have many international presenters coming through. So I do very much appreciate you taking the time, Andrew, and thank you very much for spending time in your day and in your hotel room to talk to us today. It's been a great privilege having you on and listening to you. And I feel we'll want to ask you back again but later in the year to hear more about some of the initiatives that you're talking about.
Thank you, Nick. Thanks, Ross, and thanks everyone for joining.
Thanks, Andrew. Take care. Bye-bye.